Okay, welcome to the man in the middle section. This is where we can relax a little bit since we covered all the important things that an ethical hacker must know. From scanning, from exploitation, to gaining access with Trojans and web application penetration testing. Now we can lay back and cover something that you won't need that much, but it is a cool attack that allows you to sniff information inside of a local area network. Now, in network penetration testing, this is something that you also want to try. In some networks, there will be protection that blocks this type of attacks. However, to this date, many home networks, schools and company networks don't have this applied. Anyway, before we actually get to run this type of the attack, let's first talk about how does it work. Let's start like this. Now, imagine a home network with many devices. Say we have 2 computers and also our Kali Linux machine inside of that network. Networks also have routers that route their traffic to different websites. And every time that you, for example, communicate with a web page, you do that through your router. You request a web page and a router will forward your request to that server, and when the server sends a response to you, the router will send it to your machine inside of the network. But how does it know which machine to send to? How does it know to who to forward which packet? Well, let's explain it like this. Let's go back to our 3 machines and let's mark them with A, B, and C. All of these machines, including our routers, also have an IP address. So we can say A has 192.168.1.10, B has 192.168.1.5, our Kali Linux machine has 192.168.1.7, and our router has 192.168.1.1. Besides having an IP address, all of these machines also have their MAC address. And these two help them communicate with each other over the network. Our router knows who to forward the packets to, thanks to ARP packets and ARP tables. Now, we're going to talk about ARP packets in just a second, but what I want to mention for now is that our router has ARP tables that map every IP address inside of the network with their MAC addresses. Then it uses the machine's MAC address to forward the packet to them. We know by now that MAC addresses are unique, therefore by knowing them, you know the ID of that machine and then you can communicate with that machine. Now, let's explain those ARP packets. What are they and how they allow us to communicate with each other? Well, to explain this, I will remove one machine just for the simplicity. Okay, so there are 2 types of ARP packets. We have ARP requests and ARP replies, or ARP responses. Now, with requests, we find out what machine has what MAC address, and with ARP replies, we reply to that machine that asks the question with our response. Request would look something like this. Let's say machine A wants to communicate with our Kali Linux machine. To do that, it must know our MAC address, so it sends the ARP request to the broadcast address, which simply means every machine on the network will get that ARP request. And with that ARP request, the machine A asks who has an IP address of 192.168.1.7. And it also tells, send me your MAC address if this is your IP address. In this scenario, our Kali Linux machine receives the request and it gives an answer. It says, I am 192.168.1.7 and here is my MAC address. Now, this is just normal communication in any network. This is how machines and our router figures out to who they should forward a certain packet. However, there are ways that this can be abused. For example, what if I, from my Kali Linux machine, craft an ARP response and send it to machine A saying that I am 192.168.1.1, which is the router. We know that machine A uses router to communicate with the internet, therefore, once we send the machine A an ARP response and tell it that we have an IP address of the router, it will start sending its packets to us instead of the router. For example, let's say machine A wants to visit Facebook. In this case, it would send that Facebook request to us instead of directly sending it to the real router. Well, you might be asking, what now? We just managed to redirect the traffic of machine A to go to us, and now that machine won't be able to access internet because the packets are not being forwarded to Facebook or any other page that they want to visit. Well, not exactly. We can also send an ARP response to the router. In this response, we tell the router that we are the machine A. Now machine A believes that we are the router, and router believes that we are machine A. All we are left to do in this case is forward the packets to keep the connection going. So in this scenario, instead of communication to websites going like this, instead we spoof the network and now the communication is being done like this. In this case, if machine A tries to visit facebook.com, for example, it will send that request to us, which we then forward to the router, and the router forwards it to Facebook. Like this, we can sniff the data if it is unencrypted, and we can also see what websites is machine A visiting. And this communication works both ways. Once Facebook receives machine A request, it sends the response that comes to our router, and then, since router is also being spoofed, it thinks that we are machine A, and it sends back the response to us. Then we forward the response to machine A, so machine A has no idea that it is being spoofed since it is able to visit any pages and websites. This attack is called man-in-the-middle with the help of ARP spoofing. And of course, when we perform this attack and we spoof our router and targets, their ARP tables will look something like this. The MAC address of machine A changes to our MAC address inside of the router's ARP tables. And that is while it's being spoofed. Once we stop the spoofing, the MAC address changes back to its real MAC address. Okay, great. Now that we know how exactly the attack works, let's mention a few things that we might want to get once performing this attack. The goal of it would most likely be to overall be able to sniff the data going from other machines on the same network. We also want to be able to check out what websites are other machines visiting, and if possible, in case some communication is not encrypted, we would want to sniff passwords if someone tries to log in to some page. Just most of these things depend on which websites are they visiting. Nonetheless, now that we know theory behind the attack, let's see how we can perform it using different tools. See you in the next video.